Hey everyone, it's Pat from Seattle Coffee Gear, and we are here today to take a quick look at the Solis Scala and the Bodum Bistro and see how these two grinders stack up. So let's get started. Both of these grinders are a very similar price, as you see them kind of fluctuate on sale sometimes, but they're definitely kind of directly in line with each other from that perspective. And they both operate in a pretty similar capacity. Both of these grinders are going to be good for doing your slow brewing coffee, so things like drip, pour over, press, and then they can get into a little bit of pressurized espresso, but definitely more designed as brew grinders. They're not going to work for a higher end espresso machine doing cafe style shots. So with that in mind, they're pretty similar from a feature perspective. They both have stepped grinders, which means that both of them have like clicks along the grinder adjustment level to make them really easy to set for your different brew methods. They both are going to have timers. The Scala's timer is on the side here, and the Bistro's timer is going to be up here. Both of those timers allow you to set a certain amount of time that you want the grinds to come out, so you can kind of get kind of close to the amounts that you need based on your grind setting. Both of them feature mostly plastic casing. There's a little bit more plastic in the Bistro, so that's one major point of difference off the bat. Is the Scala tends to have a longer service life just because it has some more solid construction on the inside, but they look pretty similar case-wise from the outside in terms of their materials. One thing to note is that the Bistro has some kind of cool guides on it. On the top of the hopper, there's some like information on what you might want to use for settings and timings for your grinds. It also has a kind of helpful guide along the grind setting path as well. One thing to note about that, of course, is that every coffee is going to be different. Every brew method is different. So while these guides can give you some insight, you're still going to need to do a little bit of dialing in yourself for your different brew methods and different coffees. The Scala, by comparison, has pretty simple markings and operation on it, but the coarse to fine settings are good, and you can pretty easily search for good starter settings for different, brew methods with this grinder. So let's turn them on and get a little bit of sound comparison and see what the grounds look like between them. I'm going to set them both to their kind of middle points here. That's going to be right around here on the Scala. The Scala has a couple of more grind settings on it. It's a couple more steps, so it gives it a little bit more granularity, but they're pretty comparable in that regard. And we've got the Bistro set. So worth noting that if you do need to maintain these grinders, they're both pretty easy to just twist the hoppers off and get burr access, so pretty comparable in that regard, and in how you adjust them for your different grind settings. So I'm going to set the Scala timer, and we're going to hit grind and listen a little bit for some of the noise. And then we'll do the same for the Bistro. So as you can hear, I think the Scala sounds a little bit better. I think it's got a little bit lower tone, but it's all going to be down to your ear as to which one you prefer. Both of them, the actual process of starting the grind is pretty similar. The controls are in slightly different spots. You just push the start-stop button as long as you have them plugged in and on. So let's take a look at the grinds here. The Scala here has a plastic catch bin with a plastic top on it that helps guide the grounds down into the catch bin. And by comparison, the Bistro here has a glass catch bin with kind of a little rubber grip and some rubber on the top here. And I actually kind of prefer the Scala's plastic catch bin. The glass is nice, but I find that grounds get really stuck with static and stuff to the rubber on this, so it makes it kind of difficult to clean. You kind of have to rinse it rather than just kind of wipe it down with a paper towel. So I sort of like the plastic on the Scala a little bit more, even though the glass is nice here. So we have the grinders set on similar settings, and the grinds that we're getting out are pretty different. This doesn't mean that the Bistro can't produce grounds similar to the Scala at this consistency, but it does show that the Scala's range is going to be a little bit finer than the Bistro's. And we can run some of the coarsest grounds out of this so you can see how coarse it can go. And there's also just more consistency in what the Scala's produced. The Bistro's grinds aren't terrible at the level of coarseness that they're set at, but we're getting some kind of inconsistency with some chunkier bits and some more fine bits. So in general, I would say at this grind setting, I would prefer the grinds from the Scala to what's coming out of the Bistro. Okay, so we're going to run these at their coarsest setting so we can kind of see the range there. It's about 5 seconds on the Scala. And a similar amount of time on the Bistro. So let's see what we got here. So from the Scala, we're getting some nice and coarse grounds. These are going to be great for press brewing or pour over. They're not super coarse, but you don't really need to get much coarser than this for most normal brew methods that you'd use. And the Bistro, by comparison, is going a lot coarser here. But again, these grounds are getting into the territory of like, they're a little too coarse to work with, in my opinion. So maybe if you wanted to do some kind of very long immersion style brewing, even longer than like a typical cold brew, you could find some use for these. But these are pretty coarse and not super consistent. So the Bistro is definitely going to operate a little bit better on the finer end of the scale, more for like drip and pour over and stuff. With a setting you can kind of work out for some press brewing. The Scala, I think, has pretty good consistency throughout its range. It doesn't get quite as coarse as the Bistro, but I'm not sure that you would need grinds this coarse for whatever you're brewing day to day. So with that in mind, these are both good grinders, and I think you can't go wrong with either one of them depending on your needs. Just know that if you're kind of more looking for something that can go into that finer pressurized espresso range and maybe will last a little bit longer, the Scala is probably the one for you. So the last thing we're going to look at is the fine end of the spectrum on both of these grinders. So this is kind of down to their finest settings. I haven't taken them all the way fine, but almost to that point. So run this for a few. And then we'll do the same with the Bistro. Let's take a look what we have here. So from the Scala, getting a tiny bit of clumping, but that's to be expected at this fine of a level. This is definitely going to work pretty well for your pressurized espresso. So if you have a basket that has that double wall pressurized function, then you'll be able to use those for that. And from the Bistro, you could probably get by with these grounds as well, but it's not going quite as fine as the Scala is. It's pretty good, but the Scala is definitely going to be offering a little bit more consistency and a slightly finer grind on it. So that pretty much covers it for these two grinders. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button and get subscribed to the channel so that you get all of our coffee videos as soon as they come out. Thanks.